Sorry, I've just got a settings thing come up.
No problem.
Just got to allow it to share screen. Sorry about that. I might have to exit and come back. I'm so sorry.
No problem. Is it on a Mac?
It's on a Mac, yeah.
Okay.
I must not have shared screen before on Zoom.
No, if you go to the top left and click on the Apple and click on System Preferences.
Yeah, I think it wants me to quit it, and then I'll come back in just
yeah,
one
no
second.
sweat, no sweat.
Sorry, guys.
Perfect.
Okay, can you guys see my screen now?
Yeah.
Great, okay. Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Melissa Kirkpatrick, here to talk about mental wellbeing in architecture students with you today, based on some research that was mentioned that I've done on the topic, and I'll also talk a little bit about some initiatives that I'm involved in here in the UK surrounding mental health and wellbeing. So yeah, I'm working in London at a firm called EPR Architects, designing mostly hospitality at the moment. I'm also studying for my professional qualification as an architect, and hopefully by the end of the year I'll be qualified. Yeah, so it was my master's dissertation that I wrote on mental wellbeing in architecture students, which I'll present to you the findings of. I'm also an ambassador for the UK architecture charity, Architects Benevolent Society. They provide help for architects who are experiencing financial difficulties, and also a lot more recently mental health difficulties as well, and that includes for architecture students over here. And I'm also a student representative for the UK Architects Mental Wellbeing Forum that I'll talk a bit more about later as well. So yeah, I kind of got interested in this topic because when I was studying my undergraduate degree, I started to realize there were certain mental health problems and symptoms that almost everyone seemed to be experiencing, you know, sort of panic attacks, anxiety, those sorts of things. And I started to wonder, is this a normal part of studying architecture? And is this something that you see as much on other courses, other subjects, or are these issues that maybe are slightly more specific to architecture, or just more exacerbated by some of the problems that architecture students face? Yeah, I think you probably will all be familiar that there's a certain culture surrounding architecture that it does kind of encourage unhealthy habits that can lead to mental health problems. Although I don't know if some of you started university during COVID, then maybe you haven't come into contact with this culture. I'll be fascinated here at the end. Yeah, and then so when I graduated from my undergraduate degree, I started to work in practice, and I realized that the sort of unhealthy cultures, they didn't translate well to practice. I think sort of productivity was more valued in practice, as opposed to, I mean, sort of working smart as opposed to working hard, working during the normal hours of the day. Mental health seemed to be a lot more valued, I think, in practice than kind of what I'd seen at university at that point. Yeah, so I decided to investigate this a bit further when I started my master's degree. So in 2018, I wrote the dissertation, Mental Wellbeing and the Architecture Student. This was sponsored by the Architects Benevolent Society, and I also had the help of the Royal Institute of British Architects, who they're sort of the governing body for architecture in this country. And they provided me with a lot of the data that I use, which I'll explain in a second. So yeah, my methodology was, I had a phase one of my dissertation, which was comparing architecture students with the typical student, trying to see if there was any disparity between the mental health issues faced. See what I could pick out. I used survey data provided by the RIBA they'd surveyed all these students from different universities using the same questions which had been asked the year prior to students in general across the country. So I used those two different survey results to compare and then see. So it was primarily quantitative analysis. But then phase 2 was where I decided to also survey some architecture staff, so heads of schools and heads of HR, so I could see what input what insight they could provide as well. So yeah, I conducted my research in 2018. In 2016, it had been revealed that 1 in 4 architecture students had experienced mental health problems. The main headline of my research was that it showed 1 in 3 architecture students were experiencing mental health problems. And then you can see in this kind of illustration that I projected, well, what if this gets even worse? What if in 2020 it's 1 in 2, and then God knows if it's in 2022, everyone, you know. And sadly, the projection for 2020 actually turned out to be correct, because another survey done by the RIBA in last year showed that 58% of architecture students claim to currently have mental health problems. So not just that they had them before, and that's over half of them. And I'm sure that being in 2020, 2020's brought on some unforeseen additional pressures on students and everyone really. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was a key reason behind that. So yeah, some of the key statistics that I found in my dissertation. You can see the sort of pie graphs on the left are the typical student results, and then on the right, architecture students. So 81% of architecture students claim to have experienced panic, whereas typical students, only 38%. 86% of architecture students had experienced anxiety, whereas only 55% of typical students had. And then feelings of hopelessness or worthlessness, again, you can see 78% of architecture students compared to 40. One kind of thing that I pulled out of all of this, based on the quantitative data and also based on student comments that they submitted alongside the surveys, pointed towards crits or design reviews as potentially a key trigger for these problems a lot of the time. And these are unique to architecture, so that could kind of make some sense of why panic attacks are more common, because people are scared about what's going to happen at these crits sometimes. As I know firsthand as an architecture student. And yeah, design reviews and crits, they're obviously extremely helpful, really valuable, but that's only if they're constructive. And some of my survey data, the comments from students said otherwise, that it wasn't always constructive. And I believe constructive criticism can still be delivered in a supportive environment, and it doesn't always have to be destructive. I'm sure we're all familiar with this thing, or maybe we're not, hopefully we're not, but all-nighter culture. Yeah, sort of, it's a mythology within architecture almost, a rite of passage sort of thing that's passed down, that you think you have to go through this to become an architect. I think some people do. But in reality, starting this kind of all-nighter culture as a habit, it can cause lifelong bad habits, and it really can be a detriment to your mental health. But thankfully, if you look at the chart on the left, it shows that the number of students that identified working through the night as a trigger of their mental health problems went down between 2017 and 18. I'd be intrigued to see how that's changed now. Maybe it's changed. I don't know. Maybe less people are working through the night now. Most people are working from home, but I'd be really interested to know. So a really interesting fact that I picked up on was that architecture students seem to be really open about their mental health problems. So when asked who they told about their feelings of mental distress, less architecture students told no one than typical students. So they're more likely to tell someone, 10% more likely, and they were much more likely to tell their friends about their symptoms, which I think that's really positive, that people feel that they can discuss their mental health. But also, I kind of thought that in a way this can sometimes be negative, as yeah, there's kind of this widespread belief that more mental distress and equals working harder, that the more stressed out you are, the harder you're working. And I don't think that's necessarily true. There are a lot more sort of healthy habits we should be getting into. And yeah, it kind of does become a competition of who's suffering the most at times, I think. So 42% of architecture students cited insensitivity of a lecturer or teacher as a trigger of their mental distress, compared to only 15% of typical students. So this is obviously quite a big difference. And this was one of the driving forces that made me want to send out a survey to staff as well, to kind of get their opinions on the matter. And actually, all of the staff respondents believe that mental health is an issue for architecture students in the UK. They all acknowledge that their students typically experience stress as well. So they're really aware of the problem, or the ones that answered my survey anyway. So yeah, it's not that they're not aware of the problem. And 71% said their students are never expected to overwork themselves. So it's most of them saying that they don't expect the students to overwork. But it's quite clear that the students think they are being expected to overwork. So kind of led me to think maybe there's a miscommunication between what is expected of the students, not in terms of quality of work or anything like that, just in terms of how they go about conducting their work and looking after themselves. So yeah, I made a few suggestions. I don't think I added a slide about this one, but I'll just mention it quickly first. One of them was restricting 24-hour access to studios. And that's something that they did in my School of Architecture. And I think that's a really positive thing. Feedback is a lot of people feel that it means there's less pressure on them to work through the night because the studio is not even open, so they kind of have to go home. And then some people kind of think, oh, it's a facility. I wish I had that facility there, you know. So that was one of them. Another one is mental health briefing and training for staff. So from my survey responses, so the staff kind of said that a lot of their guest reviewers, people attending crits from practice, they're from professional backgrounds with no academic training, and which is obviously great. It's great to get some informed people in to give their input and review comments. But I think the language that they use is going to be really important. So just you can see on the left some examples of what might be negative language and how that could be turned into positive language. I think it would be beneficial for the university staff to brief visiting professors, if they don't already, with an emphasis on mental health. And I know that my university also did that, so that's kind of where I got that idea from, because I thought that was a really good thing to do. And yeah, so some sort of teacher training on potentially how to deal with students who are coming to you with mental health issues would be valuable for, I think, all teaching staff. And some of my staff respondents said that they had that in place, but not all of them. but I think that's a really positive thing to do. Another suggestion was some workshops for students. So this could, well, at the time I was suggesting it could take the form of an online module. I know all modules are probably online now, or group workshops. And I really think that this should be started at the very start of students' architectural education. I think that's critical before anyone can get any bad habits or hear any bad sort of rumours on the grapevine. And there was an initiative started by the RIBA before COVID hit, which kind of did exactly that. They were trialing out workshops about mental health at architecture schools, and it kind of had to get cut short because of COVID, unfortunately. But I'm hoping it can relaunch virtually, because I think that was really valuable, and they were getting really good feedback. So yeah, and I think these should teach the importance of mental health and well-being, just to kind of drum it into us as soon as we first get to uni, and self-care, and then also teach about how key a role organizational skills play in that as well, because yeah, I think that's a really important one too. I also suggested some different models of education and different fee models as well. So at the moment it's 7 years minimum to qualify as an architect in the UK. I'm not sure what it's like over there in Canada. Maybe you can tell me after. But yeah, basically at the moment, all the academic content mainly is within your time at uni, but there's a key year in practice, sort of placement year type thing, between undergraduate and masters, where I think they could fit and try and merge some of the academic content with practice a bit more. And there are definitely models that do this at the moment. For instance, apprenticeship models. And I did a course called Collaborative Practice, which was for my master's in the UK is 2 years typically, and collaborative practice merges the first year of that with working in practice 4 days a week, and I find that really positive. And then also potentially suggested some different models for fees. Fees are a bit more of a tricky one, but potential sponsorship models, if that could become slightly more of the norm, for practices to sponsor master's degrees for students. Lowering fees, I mean, that would be nice. Yeah, fees are currently £9,250 every year for 5 years, and I believe that's about $16,000 for you guys. I'm not sure what your fees are, but I mean, I think it's pretty bad. Yeah, and a lot of this money could be spent on the materials that are really compulsory, and field trips and that sort of thing that you have to do to study architecture. So yeah, that was sort of my dissertation. And then since doing the dissertation, I've joined the Architects Mental Wellbeing Forum as the student representative. It's sort of a group of leading practices in the UK, all of whom care a great deal about mental health in architecture and making a difference in that area. Also includes the RIBA, who I mentioned, and the Architects Benevolent Society are both bodies that are members. And yeah, we've done some sort of virtual events, we've done real life events, having speakers talk about mental health and that sort of thing. And we created this Architects Mental Wellbeing Toolkit. It's sort of tips for practices and individuals on all sorts of things associated with mental health, office culture, staff education, supporting students, contracts, all that sort of thing as well, physical office environment, all sorts of things that can have a huge impact on people's mental health in the office. And that can be found on their website. I put the link on the last slide as well, if anyone wanted to check that out. And then we also did more recently a COVID-19 toolkit, and that was in summer last year. but this was more general tips for self-care and resilience during the pandemic, not necessarily so focused on architecture. I think this could honestly help anyone. But yeah, just a shorter guide, but one that I think is also really valuable. And yeah, so that's what I was going to talk about, but I'm happy to welcome any questions, and I'm really interested to know if any of the things that you heard you can relate to, or if some things are different over there. Yeah, some of the links at the bottom. Thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you. If anyone has any questions, they're welcome to just type up. I guess I'll start off. I find it really fascinating that it sounds like there's a decent number of resources in the UK, or at least, I mean, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not sort of familiar with anything like the an equivalent of like the Benevolent Society here, or like architecture well-being societies and things like that. And I believe, I'm sure you probably came across them in your studies, but I think Jeremy Till, who's written this book, Architecture Depends, I think he talks a little bit about some of these topics. And I think he actually used your university as an example with regards to some of the changes that were made.
Yeah, Sheffield's kind of at the forefront of those sort of things, really, in the UK.
Do you think that that's, I mean, do you have any idea why that might be? Is it sort of under sort of the direction of an individual, or is it sort of a local societal thing, or?
I don't know, because I know Jeremy Till used to teach there, so I don't know, maybe there's sort of, I don't know, a lot of tutors there that do care about this sort of thing, and potentially that's what they look for when they employ staff. I don't know, but yeah, there are a lot of people there that do seem to care. It's quite a social school of architecture as well in terms of design, so I don't know if that has an impact on what the approach is like to practice as well, potentially.
Does anyone else have any questions? You're welcome to just speak up. Or you can type in the chat. Yeah. Catherine, yeah, we don't have any staff here. Yeah, it's something that's come up in conversation, and I think, oh, UBC Sala, the official one, is here.
Sorry, it's Emma. It's Emma, the communications person. I'm here.
Yeah, it's something that's definitely come up in conversation, as I mentioned to you previously, and so I think your research is something that'd be interesting to cite, and I think your thesis, the PDF, I can share it with any students that are interested, because I think it's a really fascinating read. And
yeah, so, please do. Yeah.
Into a little bit more depth. I mean, particularly interesting, I think, is the numbers of every faculty member that responded said that it was, they believed that there was an issue, yet there sort of seems to be some sort of communication breakdown, and that doesn't seem local to either of our universities in particular, but seems to be something in the industry or in the field. And it's interesting.
Recognizing that there's a problem, but not quite knowing what to do.
Exactly.
In all circumstances, yeah.
That's pretty fascinating, really. I mean, I'm not sure what the answer is, but.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's been quite a bit of pressure on organisations like the RIBA, who govern, to change things, and they have been changing sort of validation criteria for schools. So there's been more of a focus on those sorts of things, and diversity and all that sort of thing recently. And yeah, because I suppose teachers, in a way, like they've got certain restrictions on them as well, and they've got their own mental health to consider, and they might not necessarily have all the answers. So I think it almost does kind of have to start from the very top and filter its way down.
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, you can't expect sort of architecture staff to have all the answers or be able to wave a magic wand, but yeah, there are things everyone can do.
Yeah.
So.
And another thing that noticed was the student fees. I mean, for international students at UBC, at least, I think they pay something in the realm of about 4 times more than a domestic student. But again, somebody can correct me in chat or by speaking up if they'd like. But I think that the amounts that you were suggesting, I think they were suggesting is not the current amount, were still quite a decent amount larger than I think what we pay here, I believe. I'd have to check my student fees, but
yeah,
that's interesting as well. And I know in the United States, uni is even significantly higher. So
yeah, I've heard there that it's absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, we're lucky that we are able to get student loans as well. But I still think the amount is ridiculous because it used to be a third of that just before I started, just before I went into uni. It was about 3,000. Yeah, it increased just before suddenly, and yeah, everyone started paying the 9 grand fees.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That wasn't just for architecture, of course. That was for all universities. But
it may be different in the UK, but I know amongst chatting with students as well, I suppose a sort of background cause of stress as well is that despite the the cost of student loans and fees and everything and interest, is that and time spent in the industry, in studies, is that once you get through that, the yearly salary it takes seemingly a very long time it would do to pay off your loans at that. So
yeah, definitely, especially for the amount of years that you have to study. So what is the route to qualification over there? How many years would it be typically?
It varies depending on your sort of I think there's a number of different trajectories. For myself, I did 4 years in undergrad, and now I'm sort of in advanced placement, but that's sort of being, it's becoming more sort of uniform. This year, prior to this year, it was a little bit more fluid. And then, so I'm in my second of 3 years. And then after that, you have to do the hours and get registered. So it sounds like it's the same, approximately 7 years, I guess. But for students at UBC, it's quite interesting because you can come from more or less any field in your undergrad, and you can submit your portfolio. So you could come from accounting or just about anything really.
Right, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Do you have a lot of people coming from all different fields then?
Oh, absolutely. I think.
Really?
I think, yeah. I mean, maybe, I don't know, 2/3 of the student body. I think it sort of varies, but
yeah,
definitely a significant.
That's interesting.
So,
just a comment. Melissa, thank you for the presentation. Super interesting. Kind of shocking that it's like everywhere that, at least that I've heard, it's like, it's not just like local to a country. It's like everywhere the culture is kind of the same thing of like anxiety and panic. But I also was thinking that I was wondering if like architecture school in general maybe attracts people who are anxious because they're just like forward thinking people.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But like
potentially, yeah.
But it makes me just, you had made a comment that the reform should come top down. I guess I just kind of agree with that because it is like the environment is probably making it worse for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, it was just a comment. Yeah, thanks for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, that's interesting. I think I have heard that notion before actually, that maybe people that study architecture are more inclined to, I don't know, be more anxious people or something like that. I don't know if it's something to do with creative people in general, but I don't know. I know that so many architecture students, it's normal in architecture to experience anxiety and panic attacks, but I don't think it should be. I hope one day it won't be. But yeah, I'm not sure.
I think along with I think Jeremy Till mentions this, and I think you touched on it as well, about sort of, I think Jeremy Till in his book sort of says that students use all-nighters as sort of a badge of honor, I think he says.
Yeah, badge of honor, he does.
Yeah, and so I think it's in sort of a study when you're working with things that are sort of, you know, like grades and sort of feedback aren't sort of quantifiable, really. They're sort of course, you know, in a creative study, they can be often very subjective. And I think, you know, I wonder if perhaps hours or, you know, sort of all-nighters invested are sort of maybe something that students can sort of feel as a tangible metric by which they can sort of say, okay, you know, I worked this hard to sort of, I guess, I don't know, validate their work or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a good point. Agreed. I think for a lot of people that probably is true. It's so subjective. You're right. It's not. Well, there's a mark scheme, but it's still subjective. It depends on the opinions of whoever's marking it, I suppose. It's not. Yeah, it's not sort of maths where there's a right or wrong answer. And I think probably a lot of people, including myself, back when I was studying, just you don't exactly know what they're looking for sometimes, and I think that's quite hard. And yeah, probably just sitting at your desk for a bit longer, you might just feel like you've done more when you might not necessarily have done.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely been there, and I think most of us have. Any other questions? Oh, Catherine or Andy says has to be a study to show you aren't nearly as productive running on no sleep than when you've gotten even a few hours sleep.
Oh, I'm sure there is. Yeah, I'm sure there is probably a study on that. There's no way anyone's as productive for a week of no sleep than for a week of, I don't know. I'm a strong believer in working in the normal working hours sort of thing. I don't know, 9 till 6 or like, I don't know, might extend it a bit longer than that. But for me, if I try and work through the night, I can just tell my brain's not functioning very well. And yeah, I'm sure there must be a study on that somewhere. That's definitely true.
Awesome. So last call for any questions, if anyone has any. No? Okay. Well, I really wanted to thank you for taking the time out of your evening to join us from the UK. And I think it was super intriguing, and I think, you know, hopefully this provides some food for thought to the people that were able to attend. And I'll be sure if anyone likes, they can contact me or reach out to me, and I'll be happy to share Melissa's thesis. I think it's well worth a read.
Yeah, and if anyone is thinking of doing any similar sort of research or is just interested, I'm happy for my email to be passed on. I'd love to hear from anyone that's doing anything like that.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you, Melissa, and take care.
Thank you. Bye.